Hi, welcome everyone to the 21st SF Doc Fest. I'm Gigi Haycock, one of the programs of the festival, and you have watched the Fragmentations Only Mean, and we are very lucky to have with us the co-directors, Jesse Lerner and Sarah Harris. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. There's a lot to unpack with this film. It's very visual and the sound and everything is incredible. But first off, I'm just curious about you telling of why Noah was the subject and the story that you wanted to tell.
I think I'm going to jump in and say that we actually really feel like Noah Purifoy isn't the subject of the film, but rather the outdoor museum is the subject. The land, the place is the protagonist. And when was it, Jesse, when we saw the show at LACMA?
That was 2000 and I don't remember the exact year.
17, I think, at LACMA. So at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, they had a solo show, posthumous solo show for Noah Purifoy's work. And they brought it into the 4 white wall space. And they brought pieces from the outdoor museum, which is what you all just saw and experienced in as close to loving and living it as we could bring to a screen. But to see those pieces out of context in that space at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, as wonderful as it was to share that in a city space, in a premier museum, we both looked at each other and went, this is really weird. Like this, we feel like these pieces really come from somewhere else. It was like they had been dropped by aliens into the museum. And then we both said, we got to make a movie about this place and go and visit.
Yeah.
The Junk Dada show that Sarah is referring to at LACMA, that was 2015. So
God,
before the
so
pandemic,
long.
but yeah, before the pandemic, but the time gets a little blurry.
Yes, it does. Yeah, the reason I was saying about Noah is just because he did the art assemblage, and he was, the first director, I believe, of the Watts Tower. And so that's why I was leading off with him, just as he being, the first Black director, I believe, head of the California Arts Council, which is now Cal Arts. And so he then started this, I believe, 18 years before he passed away. He started to create this outdoor museum. Is that
Just
from what
I think he retired from the California Arts Council and moved back to Los Angeles and found it was too expensive and it was going to be impossible for him to get a big space for him to do the kind of assemblage work that he'd been doing for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a friend that lived out in the desert and was invited to go out there, and there was plenty of space there.
Right.
So the work kind of took on another scale.
Yeah, it's actually Ed Ruscha helped him acquire land to continue his project out there. But he, I think, as you all saw in, which chapter was it, Jesse, about the Watts uprising?
The second chapter.
The second chapter. So Noah Purifoy, I mean, he spent a lot of, years of his career dedicated to the legacy of the Watts Towers and the impetus of that type of assemblage, which if you ever come to our great city of Los Angeles, our very fraught city of Los Angeles, it's a testament to the ability to take disaster and turn it into something beautiful.
Yeah, and it seemed to be that the nature also with out there in his the outdoor museum kind of incorporated itself into the assemblage in a way, because it is very arid and it's a pretty unforgiving area, and so it seemed like it kind of contributed to the sculpture that was out there. whether it means that, it, grew over it or grew within it. I mean, at least I got that impression when I was watching the film, that nature was also a part of what was happening out there. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, oh, Jesse, did you want to say something first and then I'll say something?
I was just going to say that in a indoor museum, or most museums, they take all these precautions to preserve the work and to control the climate and make sure that it doesn't deteriorate. And in an outdoor museum, especially in Noah Purifoy's outdoor museum, as you mentioned, the climate is so harsh, and there are extremes of temperature and wind, and sand and animals. So part of the work, I think, in his mind, was the interaction with the environment and the way it would deteriorate, the element of entropy, which then,
I mean, entropy, it's, we know Robert Smithson's spiral jetty. It was created with the understanding that nature in its course would act upon the artwork itself. And that's part of the artwork and its impetus. And I think anybody who you talk to about that particular moment of Noah Purifoy's artistic trajectory, I mean, as an assemblage artist, he was collecting always and creating visual jazz from, as Joe Lewis points out, from whatever he found as material that was important to him. But out in the desert at Joshua Tree at the Outdoor Museum, he was not just working with the materials, he was working with the landscape, and he was very aware of that. If you talk to Pat Brunty, who is the caretaker, and a dear friend of his, and she appears in chapter 6 with the Hang 'em High section. I mean, there's a lot of love and understanding that went into the legacy of those pieces and whether or not to continue to keep them up. Chris and John, in this section where you see us, we filmed them, rehabilitating some pieces and painting some things. And I mean, that's really about safety and about making sure people don't step on something that breaks through, or that like something flies off and hits someone in a windstorm. But, the rest of it, Noah really, from what everybody has told us and what I've heard him say himself in the archives that we've had the privilege to listen to, the oral history, is that he wanted it all to just go to the winds, as it did, or to the sun. He didn't want to preserve something or make it like a permanent. There's nothing permanent, basically.
Yeah. And to see it in the museum inside, I can understand that that's why, it seemed out of place by, when it was really supposed to be outdoors. Which brings me to why you shot on 16 millimeter. That's correct? Yeah, I saw. Okay. And why was that choice made? Did it have to do with the archival footage and all that good stuff?
For Jesse Lerner, it's never a choice. It's a commitment in life.
Okay, good to know.
Go ahead.
No, I've worked on other formats. I guess some of it has to do with this question of, fragmentation and creating something out of little bits and pieces. And I think, part of a challenge as a filmmaker is, find a cinematic language that fits, that corresponds, or that adds to dialogues with the subject matter. And all these sculptures are made out of, pieces of recycled or junk, found objects. So I think part of the with this project was, thinking of what would that junk assemblage aesthetic look like when it was translated to a big screen with audio. So that's how we came up with, there are these interventions that involve not just 16, but these
Don't
plastic,
tell them the secrets, Jesse.
okay,
It's
plastic light cameras and Super 8 and Lomo Kino, and cutting up the frame and breaking it apart into fragments and then reassembling it.
And we worked with a really amazing filmmaker, Anthony Pintet, who's he's from Barcelona, and he had come to Los Angeles and really fell in love with Southern California. And he created these peripatetic, multi-format assemblages of his own that were these interstitials that you see. We call them the Frankensteins.
Yeah.
And I designed the audio to go along with those once we committed to the ones that we were going to use. And I have to give like mad props to the Headland Center for the Arts and Holly Blake for allowing me to have a space, an old, it's part of the Nike missile site. It's an old army barracks. I don't know what was originally in this place that I created the Foley sound, but that was like a absolute joy to be able to have the ability to work with the sound on the site and actually touch the pieces. We got permission to once in a while touch, because really you're not supposed to touch the pieces on the outdoor museum, but to use those pieces and in a space from like the 1920s indoors and create a texture that could match the bricolage of those interstitials that Anthony created.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Why did you decide it was Frankenstein?
Because it's put together from so many different, I mean, like if you asked us, if you looked at my notebook, like where did all of this come from? It's like maybe 10 different sources of sound and image then put together and comes out on the other side and it's still alive.
And I would add, a lot of the sculptures themselves make sounds, when it gets windy, those hanging pieces of steel pipe start clanging against each other, and things rock back and forth and creak and rustle. And
yeah, I got a lot of that sound actually just like sitting inside of some of the sculptures with my my secret weapon, my Sennheiser microphone, for hours just listening to the sound. They're almost like sound mobiles. And there's something very Alexander Calder about them also, because they move visually, but they make sound at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also seems to go right along with the theme of assemblage art. You're assembling all these different pieces, and the sound and it's all contributed to the larger point of the film, it seems like, and about that assemblage. So then also Richard Judson Powell was an interesting character, I thought. Very informative, since we didn't have Noah there to speak for himself except in the archival footage. And he said he had worked with him side by side, I think, for 10 years. And is he doing art
Well,
still, or?
We have to say that may Richard Judson Powell rest in peace. He passed 2.5 years ago. We found out, yeah, after having tried to connect with him and his family. I saved all the voicemails that he left me. And if you do go to the Noah Purifoy Foundation's website, you'll see a eulogy for him, an obit. So Jesse, I'll let you pick up from there.
Yeah, he was an important collaborator with Purifoy, especially in the second half of the 60s and into the 70s, and the sort of Watchtower Art Center era.
Right. And was this all? Oh, so go ahead, Sarah.
No, I just wanted to add something. I mean, really, it is, as filmmakers and as documentarians, to be able to have spent the time that we spent with Judson Powell and the generosity. He was not in the greatest of health. His health was failing, but he made time to sit with us, talk with us, and pull his own archives out with ephemera, but he also spent time to talk with us about these really amazing moments that he and Noah Purifoy had together. And I will never forget his account of when they went out after the Watts uprising with wheelbarrows and carried tons of broken glass and broken neon signs and metal and brought them back to the Watts Towers Art Center together, not knowing exactly what they would do, but they just knew that there was something of value, no matter how dangerous, like to touch that stuff. I mean, I, as an assemblage artist, like I got my black rubber gloves with me all the time, and I have a tetanus shot. So like they were out there in the streets doing that together. And then they worked with children who didn't have an arts program in school. And they lifted up what I would call collective art therapy by virtue of having done that together. And that's super powerful today. And it was super powerful then. And yeah.
Yeah, and it also is it makes them remember of what happened during the Watts riot, and taking that burnt wood and using it later, and confronting racism, asking what the true value of these materials are. And being able to then transfer it into younger people and teaching them about that, so that it doesn't get lost. That seemed to really come through. And beauty from ugliness. It's really, you think of found art and put together like that, but it became beautiful. It was like a past, and then it has a real present, with being able to use it. So, which brings me to the thought, Jesse, about your archival footage mining that you did, which is it's phenomenal. Yeah, you could just let us know a little bit about that.
Sure. I like to work with archival material. I've done, some films in the past that are almost entirely archival material, and even the ones that I shoot, I always try to find ways in which you can, deepen the historical references or broaden a question or its contextualization, using material that, they're things you're never going to be able to shoot, right? Unless you were there in
a time machine.
in Watts in 1965, and I wasn't, right? So before my time, but there's ways in which you can use archival material, not simply as illustration, but also to, add additional sort of resonance and to create some kind of dialectic or friction or tension with the material that surrounds it. In this case, the majority of it is stuff that we shot, but, even what we shot is using, most of it is documenting these objects that are themselves had prior lives. And, some of those earlier purposes or earlier lives of those objects are visible. So, to use the archival footage in a way that creates new meanings and creates a new kind of tension or possibility.
Yeah, I mean,
dialogue with the archive, with the original footage.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, like, because I've done the sound mixes for several of Jesse's films, most notably like TSH and Magna Voz, and these films that are in the Atomic Sublime. Oh my God, that was nothing but archival footage. So as a sound designer, it is like mind-boggling, and it is a total time machine, Gigi, and audience. It's like, whoa, you're like in this, just the fact that, so Jesse picks a lot of these without revealing too much. And thank you to Craig Baldwin and the other cinema for being the amazing digester. I call it, we're the digesters. to have that original audio from 16 millimeter, because we pull it off of 16 and I pull it into my sound system and then work with it. It's mono sometimes, it's scratchy. It's like, whoa, what can I use from this? Can I use anything from this? And sometimes you can. And when you hear those voices from like a educational film strip that was like shown in high school somewhere in Texas in 1971, like you are in a time machine. And that's like so cool. I love it.
That's great.
And the other one other thing about archival footage, because if you shoot even in a documentary system, in a documentary production, you can sort of plan out. There's some element of the unpredictable and something that can't be scripted, but you can sort of storyboard and plan ahead. With archival footage, you start with a list of, we need shots of this, and we need footage of Watts in 1965 or what have you. And then when you go into the archive, often you find, something that's you didn't even know was there and is better than what you imagined you'd find, right? So there's also this element of the surprise, the unpredictable.
Yeah, discovery and excavation.
That sounds definitely like that. And do you get it from like just all over, and you know where to find this archival footage, basically, Jesse?
All over, but a lot of eBay.
Oh, interesting.
We make fun of Jesse for that. What I found on, like the Weird Al Yankovic song, what I found on eBay.
Yeah. And you can put Jesse's name after that. Oh, great. So I think one thing I would like to touch upon, though, just before we go, it is basically the social commentary that comes out of what the Watts Tower was, and then moving everything out into the desert. Just being able to help people understand, how this is asking the true value of these materials and in their previous life, and then also then in their new present formation. Because I'm imagining that if you're that it does that the things from before become in the present, and that they can have a social commentary, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, that's what the whole movie's about, but I'll let Jesse start so that at the end I will I'll wrap it up.
Great.
Oh, I guess
More articulate.
starting with the Watts Towers themselves, right? Sabah Rodea, or Simon Rodea, the creator of the Watts Towers, he's self-taught and didn't have a lot of formal education, didn't really sort of articulate clearly what it is that he was hoping to say with those towers. I think they're amazing artworks and they're landmarks in the city. And it's a point of reference throughout the film as this, practice for assemblage from found materials. Right. In contrast, Noah Purifoy had gone to art school and was very articulate and was thinking about the way in which these kind of artworks or art practice might inform us to create other kinds of social relationships or rethink our positionality within a society, or start conversations that we might otherwise not have. So for him, yes, I do think it was an important catalyst for some kind of social change and transformative conversation. Yeah,
and I would just add that, I mean, when you hear Francis Valesco talk about meeting Noah Purifoy and Judson Powell, and the openness and the mentorship that Noah Purifoy offered to any artist who he met, is part and parcel of his social practice in what I understand it to be. I mean, I myself feel inspired by and think about every day. This is Noah. He's my inspiration. He's here in my studio with me every morning. I say, good morning, Noah. Good morning, Joan, Didion. But I think he really, Jesse and I argued about this a lot when we were editing, is the references, the names of garbage or junk or
Mhm.
refuse, using images of garbage or trash. I don't think that Noah Purifoy thought of what he was working with as trash or garbage. People called it junk, but therein lies the rub. It's like when you live, and I'd also thank Recology in the Bay Area for just like helping pull a focus in the contemporary context, because when you think about what other people discard or what anyone discards and the landscape in which they discard it, and then what happens with it when it's durable goods, we're not talking about a piece of cellophane or mylar. We're talking about, a boiler that just got dumped in the desert, in a very fragile ecology. And what does that mean? And he was thinking about that in addition to thinking about the racial injustice that he lived through his entire life and still isn't finished. And so I think
Right.
what he gave all of us is a window into past, present, and future in a way that maybe he probably saw, because I think he was a visionary.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes across very much. I really, really enjoyed this film, and I'm so happy I was able to program it. And I think it's going to go farther. I mean, are you submitting it to other festivals, or where are you going from now?
We're not sure, but we're definitely submitting it to other festivals.
Oh, great. Good. Well, I'm so glad it's going to be showing at SF Doc Fest, and I appreciate your time so much. And if there's anything you want to add before we conclude, let me know.
Just to thank you for the conversation, and also thank the Noah Purifoy Foundation, because they not only do the good work of maintaining the outdoor museum, but they allowed us to have pretty much unlimited access to shoot there morning, noon, and night, mostly mornings and evenings, but.
Yeah, I guess that would be the one thing, is definitely the, Sue Welsh, and Susan Haler and Pat Brunty, who gave us just, we could be there and work on the site and record and film. We did morning, well, that's a whole other conversation, but I guess the thing I would want to add is that the desert, Mojave Desert, has exploded in terms of population and people coming to visit. It's become something more attractive now to folks coming from Los Angeles and tourists, and the outdoor museum has a lot more visitors than it ever has before, and that's not always a good thing. So just keep that in mind. I would say for everybody, respect, protect, and project yourself into the landscape, and think about, ways in which we're all going to be moving forward in what are pretty rough times.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. That very well said. Appreciate that. Thank you all. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.